You ever play hardcore Minecraft and feel that gut punch when one tiny redstone misfire, one accidental TNT chain, or one misclicked lever could wipe your entire world in seconds? Now multiply that feeling by every single human being on the planet. That's the real story of the Cold War. One slip, one bad order, one moment of panic, and civilization as we know it gets permanently deleted. No respawn, no backup world. Game over for everyone. Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to the channel. I'm your host, and today we're kicking off a brand new series where we break down the Cold War like it's the most intense multiplayer survival game ever played. We're talking real history, zero filter, with the gaming lens you love. If you're into epic what-if stories, close calls, and how the world almost ended more times than we like to admit, you're in the right place. Smash that like button right now if you're ready. Subscribe if you want the full series, and let's dive in. Chapter 2. The final boss falls, but a new night begins. Summer 1945. Picture the summer of 1945. The most brutal survival mode in human history had just ended. The Axis faction, Hitler's Germany, Imperial Japan, Mussolini's Italy had been completely crushed into pixels. The biggest boss fight of the 20th century was over. Soldiers from America, Britain and the Soviet Union were hugging it out in the streets of Europe, like they'd just beaten the Ender Dragon together. They genuinely believed the hard part was done. Swords could go back in the chest. They could finally focus on rebuilding their shattered bases, their homelands. Peace was supposed to be the permanent unlock. But history doesn't do happy endings that easy. Joseph Stalin looked at the map and saw something completely different. To him, this wasn't the end of the game. It was just halftime. He wanted an unbreakable safety buffer around his empire, a wall of obsidian so thick no enemy could ever touch him again. Even though the Allies had promised free elections and independence for Eastern Europe, Stalin went full power play mode. He installed loyal puppet governments, turned entire countries into his personal vassal states, and locked down the region tighter than a max security prison. Winston Churchill saw the writing on the wall in one of the most famous speeches of the era. He warned the world, "An iron curtain has descended across the continent." That obsidian wall didn't just divide land, it split families, friends, and the entire future of Europe right down the middle. Brothers who fought side by side yesterday were now aiming their crossbows straight at each other's hearts. Chapter 3. Europe is a dead biome. The economic war begins. Right after the war, Europe looked like a completely griefed server. Cities reduced to rubble, farms destroyed, millions homeless and starving. The people were running on empty. No food, no fuel, no hope. America understood a fundamental truth that Stalin missed. The most powerful weapon isn't always the biggest bomb. Sometimes it's prosperity, real, tangible improvement in people's lives. So the United States launched the Marshall Plan, one of the most ambitious rebuild programs in history. Over $13 billion, think literal mountains of emeralds, flowed into Western Europe. Factories rose from ashes. Roads got rebuilt. People started eating regular meals again. Economies didn't just recover, they exploded into growth. It was like giving your teammates creative mode for rebuilding while everyone else stayed in survival. Stalin saw this and immediately countered with his own system, Comecon. He forced every Eastern Bloc country into a harsh, centrally planned economy where Moscow called every shot. No freedom to trade, no real innovation, just orders from the top. For the first time in history, two superpowers weren't fighting with tanks and planes right away. They were suffocating each other with economics resources and competing visions of how the world should work. This was the real start of the Cold War, not with a bang, but with two completely different game modes running on the same map. Chapter 4. The Berlin Blockade. Starvation as a weapon. 1948 to 1949. The first real flashpoint hit in Berlin. The city sat deep inside Soviet-controlled East Germany, but the Western Allies still controlled their sectors in the west side of the city. Stalin saw an opportunity to squeeze the West out for good. He ordered a total blockade. No food, no coal, no medicine. Nothing could reach West Berlin by road, rail, or canal. His plan was brutally simple. Starve 2 million people until the West surrendered the city and pulled out. Here's where Stalin completely misread the situation. The Western Allies looked at the blocked ground routes and said, "Fine, we'll take the sky." What followed was one of the most incredible humanitarian operations ever pulled off the Berlin Airlift. For 11 straight months, American and British pilots flew round the clock in some of the worst weather imaginable. Planes were landing every 45 seconds at the height of the operation. Over 200,000 flights delivered more than 2.3 million tons of food, fuel, and supplies. Kids in West Berlin started calling the low-flying planes candy bombers because one American pilot, Gail Halverson, started dropping little parachutes made from handkerchiefs filled with chocolate and gum. It became a symbol of hope in the middle of despair. The Soviets expected the West to fold. Instead, they watched in shock as the impossible became routine. Human resilience and logistics won the day. The blockade was broken. West Berlin survived. Round 1 went to the Allies, and it proved that sometimes the best defense is refusing to play by the enemy's rules. Chapter 5. The atomic monopoly ends. The rules change forever. 1949. Just when people started breathing again, everything changed in August 1949. Through an incredibly effective spy network that had penetrated deep into American and British labs, the Soviet Union successfully tested their first atomic bomb, RDS-1. The American monopoly on the ultimate weapon was gone overnight. The world collectively held its breath. Up until that moment, the United States had been the only player with the nuke in their inventory. Now, both sides had the power to end everything. A direct head-on fight was no longer about glory or territory. It was a guaranteed path to mutual extinction. The entire planet had just entered mutually assured destruction mode, MAD for short. From that point forward, the superpowers understood that any all-out war would mean nobody wins. The game had fundamentally changed. They would still compete, still clash, still push each other to the limit. But they would do it through proxies, through economics, through technology, and through constant psychological warfare. Because one wrong move with the big red button, and the whole server gets wiped. Chapter 6. Korea. The First Proxy War. 1950 to 1953. With nukes now off the table for direct use, the two giants started settling scores using other people's blood. The Korean Peninsula became the first major sacrificial chessboard in June 1950. North Korean forces, heavily backed by Stalin, surged across the 38th parallel like a massive, unstoppable flood. They nearly pushed the South Korean and American forces into the sea. Then, General Douglas MacArthur pulled off one of the most audacious moves in military history with the Incheon landing, cutting the North Korean army in half and driving them all the way back to the Chinese border. But here's where it got terrifying. 500,000 Chinese volunteer troops poured across the Yalu River like an endless mob invasion. They hit the UN forces with brutal human wave attacks in freezing winter conditions. The fighting was some of the most savage of the entire 20th century. MacArthur was so desperate, he begged Truman to let him use nuclear weapons. Truman refused. He knew that once that line was crossed, there might be no going back. The war dragged on for 3 more years of brutal stalemate trench warfare, artillery duels, and endless negotiations. When the armistice was finally signed in 1953, the border was almost exactly where it had started. Millions of Koreans, Chinese Americans, and others had permanently logged off. And for what? a frozen conflict that still divides the peninsula to this day. The Korean War taught everyone a brutal lesson, even without using nukes. Limited wars could still kill millions and solve almost nothing. Chapter 7. The Age of Paranoia. Red Scare versus the Iron Curtain. Early 1950s. By the early 1950s, the entire world had fallen into extreme paranoia. Every shadow could be an enemy. Every neighbor could be a spy. In the United States, the Red Scare swept through society like a virus. Senator Joseph McCarthy and others went on witch hunts accusing teachers, actors, government workers, basically anyone, of being communist sympathizers. Careers were destroyed overnight. People were blacklisted. Lives were ruined over rumors and guilt by association. It was like living in a server where anyone could report you and you'd get banned without a trial. Behind the Iron Curtain, things were even worse. The KGB and East German Stasi had eyes and ears everywhere. Phone lines were tapped. Mail was opened. Neighbors were encouraged, sometimes forced, to inform on each other. One wrong joke, one offhand comment, and you could disappear in the middle of the night. People stopped trusting their own friends and family. The constant surveillance created a society where fear was the default setting. Both sides claimed they were protecting freedom. Both sides were building systems that crushed individual liberty in the name of security. The Cold War wasn't just about bombs and borders. It was about controlling minds and hearts. Chapter 8. The Space Race Ignites. Beating the enemy to the stars. 1957. Onward. Stalemated on the ground and terrified of nuclear fire, both superpowers looked upward. Whoever controlled space could potentially control the high ground of the next war. In October 1957, the Soviet Union shocked the world by launching Sputnik, the first artificial satellite. It was literally just a metal ball with a radio transmitter beeping as it orbited Earth. But that simple beep, beep, beep was heard around the entire planet, and it felt like a gut punch to American pride. For the first time since World War II, the United States wasn't number one at something that mattered. Then came the even bigger shock. Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space in 1961. The Soviets had put a man into orbit. If they could do that, the logic went, they could eventually drop nuclear warheads from orbit or deliver them anywhere on Earth with unstoppable rockets. America responded with fury and focus. NASA was born. Billions were poured into catching up. The space race became the ultimate prestige battle, part science, part military technology, part pure national ego. Every launch was another round in the ongoing game of one-upmanship, and the entire world was watching. Chapter 9. The Berlin Wall, a prison built overnight. August 13th, 1961. While the space victories gave the Eastern Bloc propaganda wins, something was rotting from the inside. Millions of East Germans were voting with their feet, escaping to West Berlin whenever they could. The brain drain was becoming a national embarrassment. On the night of August 13th, 1961, the Soviet-backed East German government acted decisively and ruthlessly. In just a few hours, barbed wire went up across the entire city. By morning, it was clear this wasn't temporary. Within days and weeks, a massive reinforced concrete wall was rising, complete with guard towers, minefields, and shoot-to-kill orders. The Berlin Wall didn't keep Westerners out. It kept East Germans in. Families were torn apart overnight. Parents lost children. Husbands and wives were separated for decades. Anyone who tried to escape risked their life. The wall became the ultimate symbol of the Cold War. A giant prison built by a government to keep its own people from leaving. It was one of the most cold-blooded moves of the entire conflict. And it worked for almost 30 years. Chapter 10. Checkpoint Charlie, 16 hours from World War III. October 1961, just 2 months after the wall went up. The world came closer to nuclear war than most people realize. At Checkpoint Charlie, the famous crossing point between East and West Berlin, American and Soviet tanks rolled up and faced each other from just a few dozen meters apart. For 16 straight hours, the two sides stared each other down with loaded guns and live ammunition. Behind them, tens of thousands of nuclear warheads sat armed and ready on hair-trigger alert. One mistaken command, one nervous soldier pulling a trigger, one misinterpreted radio message, and the entire planet could have gone up in nuclear fire. The tension was so extreme that some historians still call it one of the most dangerous moments of the entire Cold War, even more immediate than the later Cuban crisis in some ways. But somehow, miraculously, cooler heads prevailed. Secret orders came through. The tanks backed away, centimeter by centimeter. No shots were fired. The world had just stared into the abyss and stepped back from the edge. Chapter 11, the teaser. But the real nightmare was just beginning. You might think that backing down in Berlin meant the worst was over. Kennedy and Khrushchev probably hoped the same thing. They were wrong. Less than 90 miles from the American coast, on a tropical island called Cuba, the Soviet Union was quietly installing nuclear missiles capable of hitting major US cities in minutes. The enemy had placed the ultimate weapons right on America's doorstep. The survival game was about to switch to its most brutal difficulty setting yet. That's the story we're telling in the next episode, the Cuban Missile Crisis. The 13 days when the world came closer to annihilation than at any other point in human history. If you want to see how two superpowers stared each other down with their fingers literally on the nuclear button, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell. Trust me, you do not want to miss it. Before you go, I've got one question for you in the comments. Which moment from this chapter of the Cold War surprised you the most, or hit you the hardest? The Berlin Airlift, the sudden building of the wall, the tank standoff at Checkpoint Charlie, or something else? Drop your answer below. I read every single comment, and your thoughts genuinely help shape future episodes. If this video gave you that mind-blown feeling, smash the like button, share it with a friend who loves history or gaming, and subscribe for the full series. We're just getting started on this wild ride through the Cold War. Thanks so much for watching all the way to the end. Stay curious, stay sharp, and remember, in history, just like in the hardest Minecraft worlds, one wrong move can change everything forever. See you in the next one. Peace.